If you feel mentally exhausted, stuck, or burned out, even though you're capable of being productive and doing all the right things, this conversation is for you. Today, we're talking about why burnout and anxiety are often caused by how we think, not how hard we work, and how restoring creativeness and creativity can change everything. Now, today I'm very excited about this, Dr. Andre. He's a social psychologist who studies creativity and helps people recover from burnout by restoring balance between analytical and creative thinking. Now, I am so excited to have you on the show, Dr. Andre. I really want to dig right into this because this is something that so many people struggle with, the two things, anxiety and burnout. Now, why are there so many high performance people feeling burnt out and anxious right now? And even when they're successful on paper, they still feel burnout and they still go through anxiety.
Well, it's a great question, and it can be thought of as a number of things that come together to create that situation. But the underlying factor is really it's to do with an imbalance in the way we think, and it is to do with whether or not you look at everything in your life in an analytical and deductive way, as opposed to the other side, which is looking at things in a more creative way. And to be clear, this is nothing to do with art therapy or anything of that nature. This is a fundamental way that we look at the world. And it's something that humans have always had. I mean, from when we invented the bow and arrow or the spear or the wheel, right up to the iPhone, the internet, the jet engine. This is something that we is innate to us. We want to improve our world, and we do it by creating new things, inventing things. We don't have the iPhone and the internet because we've got opposable thumbs.
Mhm.
We have them because of this innate human drive. So I want to really position creativity in with that seriousness. This is the source of our social evolution.
Mhm.
And as with any innate human drive, if we are deprived of it, there are negative consequences.
Mhm.
And so I believe that in this highly technically oriented world that we live in, we are persuaded through our socialization to think of things in a very deductive and analytical fashion. And you see this even in the way that people think. I mean, we talk about drilling down and focusing in on. And so many things, so you switch on the TV and somebody's trying to explain to you that it's going to cost you a lot of money if your water main bursts. And, so immediately you're thinking you're thinking of the consequences of that happening. So it's a deductive, analytical kind of process. And it's relatively rare that we sit back and think of things in a creative way. And
Right.
the reason that's important is that creative thinking is inherently divergent. I
Mhm.
think of this as, when I look at my grandkids, when they were sort of 2 and 3 years old, and every day they would find some new little item, and perhaps, a bar of soap would suddenly become a cell phone, and and this is pure creativity. They're looking at their world as if every little thing that they find, they're trying to make sense of.
Yes.
It's like taking a jigsaw puzzle piece and putting it into a partly completed jigsaw puzzle. You have to
Mhm.
look at the whole picture, and that's not easy, especially if you haven't got a lid with the picture on it.
Right.
So that's how they make sense of their world. We, as adults, we don't do that. As
Yes.
adults, when we have a new situation, our subconscious disappears into its filing cabinets and says, have we ever encountered this situation before?
Right.
And if we have, we use that as the basis for how we tackle this new situation. And it's really efficient. I mean, it saves an awful lot of time. And it also saves energy.
Hmm.
Using thinking the way that little babes think is actually very, very time consuming, very energy consuming. I mean, when we're thinking like that, we actually use as much energy as going for a stroll.
Hmm.
So it's our brains are very, very keen on saving energy and being energy efficient. You could call it laziness, but I'm going to call it efficiency. So that's how we think as adults.
Right.
And, babies can't think like that because they're looking at a blank canvas. They don't have that history.
Yes.
So it's not really true to say that it's natural for us to think analytically and deductively, but
Right.
it is the way that we tend to think as adults. And it's
Hmm.
inherently convergent. And
Yes.
the trouble with something that's convergent in the thinking is that you don't see the whole picture. And if you're working with somebody, or if you've got friends a friend that's stressed out or burnout or has anxiety, they tend to always be thinking about their anxiety and their burnout. I call it the hamster wheel effect, but it's kind of like a racehorse with blinders on.
Yeah.
And in social psychology, we have a phrase called seizing and freezing. And that's what
Hmm.
we get under stress, where we think of the first solution to a problem and we don't expand our field of vision to think of other solutions. And that convergence is very dangerous. And I believe it's the root, this imbalance between the way we think
Right.
is really the root of our burnout and our anxiety.
Right. Now, in development, in developed cultures, we heavily trained to think analytically. Like, how does the shape, the way people, experience stress and exhaustion differ?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's there are so many sort of component parts to this process, aren't there? But when people start the journey towards burnout,
Hmm.
so many things conspire to make that journey to make it impossible to get off that set of tracks on your own. Um, once people start that journey, they often lose the ability to get a decent night's sleep.
Yeah.
And even if everything else were equal, just surviving on very, very poor sleep for very long is very difficult, very challenging.
Hmm.
But there are other things that come along with that. People in burnout tend to reject those people around them who could actually be of help.
Yeah.
I had burnout in the last few couple of years of my 15-year span as an entrepreneur,
Hmm.
taking my crazy ideas to become global leaders in their field. And it was very high energy work. There was very little room to maneuver if there was an unforeseen problem coming up.
Right.
Um, and during that phase, I really blocked out other people in my life as much as I possibly could, and that's a common symptom of people with burnout, and um, that's a real problem because those people could be the very ones that would help you get out of your burnout condition, but you
Yeah.
push them away and try and get it all sort of done yourself.
Hmm.
So there are
Yeah.
just so many component parts to this process. In the programs that I have to help people with burnout, I actually create three pillars in the
Hmm.
very early days, and I call them the three R's, and that's relationships, recreation, and responsibilities. And those are the three core areas that if you can build strength in those areas, then you're a long way to solving the problem. And it's not just about solving burnout, it's also creating resilience against burnout recurring. I mean, of the sort of roughly 50% of professional adults in the US who report having had burnout in their current career,
Right.
and of that, about 60% of them will have burnout again in the next 18 months. So what we're really doing is to use those three pillars to build resilience as well as to actually solve the problem. But those three pillars really are the key in the sense that relationships, if you can keep good contact with your friends, your family, your spouse, and those people are there, they can support you. We're not asking them to make any great sacrifices. We're just asking them to be there for us. And
Hmm.
then recreation of any type, whether it's playing tennis or, a game of cards with the friends or, a walk in the woods, whatever it is, those kinds of activities can really help you change your neural pathways. And that's what it's all about, creating neural pathways that get out of that convergent thinking place into divergent thinking. And
Mm.
so and then responsibilities is really about being able to either delegate or share responsibilities in such a way that as you leave your brain a little bit more space
Right.
to create those new neural pathways.
Now, you talk about convergent and divergent thinking as a distinct neural pathways. Now, what happens when one dominates and the other is neglected?
Well, in the age that we live in, it's very seldom that divergent thinking processes dominate. They do in very occasionally. The bigger problem is the fact that everything in our world tends to persuade us to focus on to focus, and
Yeah,
that is an inherently analytical, deductive kind of process.
right.
And almost everything we do in terms of decision making, it tends to be a sort of um, you put this in this side of the scale, and we put this in this side of the scale, and we'll weigh it up. This is deductive and analytical. And we
Hmm.
use phrases like, focus in and drill down. And so, that convergent process is very antithetical to seeing our whole world.
Right.
And that's not just a problem in the sense of the fact that it can heighten anxiety and the chances of burnout. It's a problem in terms of our whole decision-making process.
Yeah.
In after 9/11, when the airline industry um, went into a panic because the skies had been closed for a few days, and the naysayers were there saying, nobody's ever going to fly again, and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
That stress caused a lot of airlines to slough off a lot of people. Let go of a third of our, captains of flight crew and so forth, and slough off some of the routes that are not making us quite so much money and blah 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 blah. And
Right.
so, the airline that didn't do that was Southwest, and it
Right.
actually soaked up some of these routes and some of the excess people because they were thinking differently. They were able to say, okay, we've got a big problem, but let's just stand back and try and view this, in proportion.
Yes.
Are people really never going to fly again? You know, and so it's a critical process just in our lives and our business, and not just about burnout. And
Right.
it's interesting if you just reflect. This is a relatively modern phenomenon that we don't have creative thinking in parallel with deductive and analytical thinking. If you go back to the first millennium when China was inventing gunpowder and the compass and all sorts of technological things, they were
Right.
also evolving in terms of art and mathematics.
Hmm.
And similarly with the Greeks, I mean, the originators of the democratic society. Even
Right.
in the Industrial Revolution, you've got the same thing. You have phenomenal advancement in terms of music, in terms of art, in terms of writing and different styles of storytelling, as well as technology. We call it Industrial Revolution because, that was the sort of big thing
Yeah.
with engines starting to turn wheels and stuff. But, in fact, lots of other things. And that's not really true today. Today
Right.
we have phenomenal advancement in technology, and obviously with AI, that's we're in the infancy of a real sociological change.
Right.
But what we don't have is a similar kind of advancement in
Mhm.
terms of our creative thinking.
Right.
And you can kind of see that technology has really taken the stage.
Hmm.
I'll just give you one example. If you wind the clock back 3,000 years, when Vedic sciences were created, Ayurveda for medicine, Stapatya Veda for architecture,
Right.
which went off to become went off to become Feng Shui, and you
Hmm.
had Vedas for all aspects of your life.
Right.
Now, you have to think about the fact that how long we must have been aware of gravity,
Hmm.
right? I mean, there's no beginning point for that, is there?
Right.
That 1666 was the first time that gravity was described in any kind of a sensible way. I
Right.
mean, that's phenomenal, isn't it? When you think about, by the time we got to 1666, so much of our world had been described. But
Yeah.
that really is a sort of indicator of the fact that we started to think in a scientific method kind of process. And that,
Right.
that is inherently um, deductive. I mean, we're creating deductive processes of making sense of our world. And
Right.
before that, it was much less so. And so, I think we have to build resilience, to
Hmm.
build mental health in general. We
Right.
have to really balance that way that we've been socialized
Right.
with this core innate drive to be creative.
Right. I agree. Now, how does this imbalance show up in real life, like mentally, emotionally, and physically?
Um, how does it currently show up in my life? Well, um, I'm a 40-year meditator, and meditation is a powerful way to help you think um, divergently because you're not actively focusing your thoughts on any one specific thing. So that's a powerful process. There are lots of other things that can add up to this.
Right.
There are specific areas that I've mentioned that are powerful, but there are lots of other things as well. In the morning, I'm the one generally that opens the blinds in the bedroom, and I'm
Hmm.
lucky enough to have a beautiful view of the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Hmm.
And every morning, my blind opening process is probably about 5 seconds longer than it needs to be because I look at those hills. You know,
Right.
sometimes they're snow covered as they are at the moment. They're often slightly pink with the rising sun to one side. It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And there are lots of very lovely places I can go for a walk. And
Right.
walking has some powerful physiological benefits,
Yes.
but also you're exposing yourself to nature. So, the 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 bird noises, even the wind rustling in the trees, the different colors of the leaves as we go through the seasons. There are all
Right.
sorts of ways in which we can acknowledge the beauty that's around us.
Yes.
And that is inherently divergent.
Hmm.
And one of the things that is often suggested if we go for a walk is to keep looking up. I don't know if you've come across that. You might have come across somebody saying that because it's supposed to increase your mood, make you a happier person,
Yes.
and it does. But nobody really explains why that is, and I believe it's because when you look up, you are seeing a much wider area of the world than you are when you're walking, staring at your feet.
Yeah.
And so anything that you can do to just help yourself step back. When you're
Mm.
making decisions during the day, we make many, many decisions, but um, just really ask yourself, are there options that I'm not seeing? Are there
Right.
other ways I could look at this situation? And just other things when when you've got your arms around your partner,
Right.
how do they feel? How do they smell? How do they, enjoy the moment?
Right.
Enjoy every aspect of what it is you're looking. Use all of your senses as
Yes.
opposed to being trapped inside your brain.
Right.
So, those things that they to some extent they sound a little bit sort of woo-woo, but the reality is that put together, they all help you look at the world from a wider perspective
Yes.
and overcome that imbalance.
That's very true. When people realize burnout isn't a weakness, but it's a signal of imbalance, what changes that for them?
Um, I think I think that raises an important question. And just before I get to the answer, I'll say something before ahead of that in the sense that the medical profession doesn't consider burnout to be a discrete illness. It's
Hmm.
just subsumed under the heading workplace stress.
Right.
And I really don't like that description for a whole range of reasons. I mean, firstly, it is not restricted to the workplace. Once
Right.
you've got burnout in every corner of your life.
Exactly.
It's just, and the second thing is that it suggests that the problem is related to the workplace.
Hmm.
I prefer anyway to define stress as when you don't have the resources to cope with a challenge.
Right.
And what that does is that forces you to at least share the responsibility for your condition
Hmm.
with the outside world. So it's reasonable to say that some of the causes of stress are going to be environmental, as in not within you.
Yes.
And and that's a reasonable thing to do. But what you have to do is to also say, I am also related to that stress. That
Right.
stress is something that I am feeling. It's to do
Mhm.
with how I see the world, how I see this particular challenge, and what I'm doing about it. So
Right.
it's really important to help people to realize that their burnout, their stress, or I believe any other illness
Yeah.
um, is something that you have to take some responsibility for.
Right.
And I had cancer 4 years ago. I was diagnosed with cancer, and after 3 years of internal radiation treatment, external radiation treatment, a total of 16 medical procedures on top of that. Um, it was a struggle to blame myself for any of this. And of course, it's not about blame. It's
Right.
about accepting the fact that your condition, your health, your recovery is something that you have responsibility for. How
Right.
you how you deal with that. And with something like burnout, it's important because um, it is really solely down to you. You are the person that um, has to reach out to those people that can help you.
Yes.
You're the person that has to take responsibility for your own well-being. People in particularly with severe burnouts are often not eating properly. When
Mhm.
they are eating, it's not terribly healthy. And so, we have to take responsibility for that. So I think that sort of locus of responsibility is a really important factor
Yeah.
when you're talking to people about mental balance, because getting your perception of the world in balance is
Hmm.
only your responsibility. Nobody else is going to do anything about that. You can
Exactly.
enroll their help and say, look, how about we, take half an hour at lunchtime and walk together. That's
Yeah.
something you can do, and that is taking responsibility for it.
Right. Oh, I love that answer. Now, what is divergent thinking and why is it so essential for well-being, not just creativity?
Well, I think without having a wide angle view of your world, it's very easy to get trapped into the feeling that you have no options.
Right.
If you, I spent some time in the Soviet bloc before the wall went down,
Hmm.
and there were a lot of people in Romania who had felt they had very little in the way of options. They couldn't easily leave their country. They couldn't easily leave their job. Their job was allocated to them. They had no choice.
Yeah.
Romania was actually the Soviet Union's tractor factory. And
Yeah.
so whether you liked it or not, most of the population were focused on building bits of tractor. So, I sort of see that as a little bit of a parallel. Now, here in the US, we have more freedoms than almost anywhere else in the civilized world. I say civilized world, but developed world, I should say, really.
Right.
Um, and that ability that we have is very powerful because it enables us not just to do a broader range of things, but also to see a broader range of options.
Right.
And you don't have to be incarcerated to know that not having options can lead to serious negative consequences. Anyone
Right.
that's been trapped in a relationship that is not something that they want to be in, or even worse, is actually physically or mentally damaging them,
Right.
or even in a job or a profession. I've
Hmm.
had coaching clients that have been accountants since they left school, and because of the fact that they've reached a good earning capacity, they've reached the tops of their professions, whether they don't feel that they have the option to change. But
Right.
without that, and yet they feel it's not something that they're really wanting to do internally. It's not
Yeah.
not their life's work. So, anything can really do this, but not having um, not having divergent thinking makes it easier for the brain to basically focus just on a small set of options. And that
Right.
means you don't see all the possibilities for your future, and that makes life look hopeless or have less hope in it. It's a very negative phenomenon.
I agree. What are some small, realistic ways people can actually reactivate creative thinking without adding more pressure to their lives?
Well, almost everything we do, we can enhance with um, with introducing creative thinking. And once again, creative thinking is not just about doing anything artistic. Um, I mean, obviously, if you used to play a musical instrument, or you used to write, or you used to paint,
Yeah.
adding those things into your life will
Yeah.
have the effect of helping your mind become more divergent, more creative. But
Hmm.
creative thinking also is about um, is about how you perceive your world.
Yes.
So, for instance, if you want to plan the vacation with your family,
Right.
why don't you get with them, get some photographs, print off some illustrations from the internet, and build a dream board.
Right.
I've had clients that have built dream board with a little electronic slide projector in the middle. So,
Yeah.
you've got a continual stream of pictures for, in this case, it happened to be Costa Rica. And then the rest of the dream board was all sorts of, pictures of beaches and they were actually planning to move to Costa Rica. And
Hmm.
so, and the whole family participated. So in so many levels, that was a useful thing to do. But just in terms of sort of everyday life, then just changing things around a bit, getting out of your thinking rut. So if you drive to work, have a number of different routes. Almost always there are different routes you can take to drive to work, and you'll see different things. I didn't realize they put a park there, or oh, that's a new restaurant. That might be interesting to try. All sorts of things. That all that stuff
Yeah.
is about creating new neural pathways. That's what it's all about. Maybe when you go to your closet to pick out the clothes for the day, you don't pick out the same old clothes every day. Perhaps, switch it around a little bit. And
Right.
there are all sorts of ways that we can, just in everyday activities, just
Mhm.
think, you know what, let's do this a slightly different way.
Yes. I like that. Now, a lot of people say, I'm not creative or I don't have the time for that. What do you say to those people?
You're absolutely right. If I'm talking to a room with sort of 50 people or something, I'll probably get half a dozen people saying, I'm not sure this is for me because I'm really not creative.
Yeah.
We have all been creative once.
Yeah.
And when we were babies and we were trying to make sense of our world, and
Mhm.
unfortunately not too many people can remember when they were 2, 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah.
But you can watch your grandkids or your kids or whatever, and when they are trying to make sense of their world, every day they've got some new little discovery on this fast track to trying to make sense of what is quite a complicated world. And they're trying to use that little thing that they found today, like putting it into a partly completed jigsaw puzzle. And they're
Right.
trying to use it to create an accurate picture of their world. And that is pure creativity.
Yeah.
There's a parallel really in our adult life.
Yeah.
If we go to I remember the first time I went to India, and my wife and I landed at the airport, and that was interesting anyway because as we get our luggage, we have to push a little button, and we have to do that. The guy next to us, in the uniform from the he doesn't push it. We have to push it, and then the light either goes green or red. And if it's
Hmm.
red, we get our baggage searched. If it's green, we walk on through. But it's,
Yeah.
it's very careful to point out that because we're pushing it, it can't be biased. There's no profiling, which I thought was
Yes.
kind of fun. But we get out into the street, and within minutes of getting into the taxi, we're weaving in amongst elephants on the street. I mean, it
Wow.
was phenomenal. It was like these, huge animals up there, and we're right next to them. And, they don't care about the taxi, and the taxi doesn't care about them. I mean, the taxi is sort of weaving in amongst these elephants. But, when you're in that sort of very different environment, you're doing the same thing as a 2, 3, 4-year-old kid. I mean, your view of where you are, the country, is like 360 degrees all the time because you're seeing things that are sort of, different. And,
Yeah.
so many times I'm thinking, wow, that's a different way of doing it, but it seems to work.
Yeah.
And it's just really a fascinating experience. But, so we can have those experiences as adults as well as kids. So
Right.
anybody that says, I'm really not creative, my answer to them is, you were once. Let's have a look at what happened.
Right. I love it. I love it. Now, if someone was listening and they're burnt out and, right now, like what is the one thing they can do this week to start reinstalling their balance?
Well, I mean, one thing they can do is to go to my website, push the button, and make a an appointment to have a free discussion with me. And I'm always happy to help people. I've got 3 programs that help people resolve burnout quickly and easily, from very, very inexpensive to a highly intensive one-on-one coaching program. But in terms of if they don't feel inclined to do that, really the sorts of anything that starts to help you step back from where you are. You're like a racehorse with blinders right now with
Yeah.
burnout. You can only see the path straight ahead.
Hmm.
And in order to get out of that, you need to start doing things that will allow your brain to take a wider angle view of your world. And
Right.
that can be as simple as saying, I'm going to go for a walk for half an hour every day.
Hmm.
And sometimes people say, I just don't have half an hour in every day. Well, you better find it
Right.
because this is not going to go away. This isn't going to go away when you take a week off.
Right.
This is a much deeper process.
Hmm.
And so really the key is to get out of those decision-making ruts that we
Yeah.
make every day, as in, intuitively, you've got a problem, you've got a challenge on your hands, or you've got a decision to make, and you do the same thing you did before. That's
Right.
how our brains were trained to do this. And we're talking about having to create new neural pathways. And
Yeah.
that's the only way that you're going to build the resilience to make sure you don't get burnout again, because 60% of people with burnout will have it again in the next 18 months.
Right.
And it's also a path to happiness and
Hmm.
emotional intelligence.
Right.
And um, imaging studies of the brain show that the creative thinking processes I'm talking about are actually the same neural pathways as emotional intelligence.
Hmm.
And we know, from social studies research um, that happiness and creativity are correlated. If
Yeah.
you're doing something creative, the chances are that you are also going to be happier. So it's a triple whammy.
Yeah. It's very true. Now, this really reframes, burnout, not just as something to push through, but as a signal that something needs rebalancing. If you could, maybe give three key takeaways that you want people to remember from our conversation today that you think will be very beneficial, what are some things you'd like them to remember from this conversation?
I think one of the most important parts really is to really value your relationships with others because people with one of the signs of burnout is that we slough off relationships that we have with the very people that could help us.
Yeah.
So getting ahead of the game and making sure that people feel valued in your
Mhm.
relationship, and of course they will show you that you're valued in that relationship. And
Yes.
because that human connectedness is not inherently convergent. It's
Yeah.
divergent. It has many different dimensions that we can
Right.
enjoy. We
Yes.
can enjoy the physical touch, the hugs from our spouse and our kids, or
Yeah.
indeed even our pet.
Hmm.
Um, so, those kinds of things that incorporate many different dimensions are very powerful. As I
Yeah.
say, I think, hanging on to recreation. Almost everybody with burnout has managed to find an excuse not to carry on playing tennis or doing this or whatever their recreations were. So
Right.
make sure that they have a value in your life, and some of those could be non-negotiable.
Right.
Going for a walk every day for me is non-negotiable unless it's actually pouring with rain or below freezing.
Yeah.
And, so decide what is really important in your life in the long term. So we're
Right.
not going to look, sure, you've got this is your to-do list at work for the day. Sure, that's important. But there
Right.
are other things that in the longer term are much more are also very important. So I think, when we're talking about looking at options, the important thing to bear in mind is that short-term thinking about your life has to
Yes.
be balanced with long-term thinking. And I'm
Yeah.
talking, 5 years, or in the course of in something that is not about today, this week, or this month. Let's
Yes.
really focus on that. So having those things valued, social relationships, recreation, and taking time for yourself. I mean, for me, meditation is a non-negotiable.
Hmm.
For other people, it might be sitting and reading for an hour every day.
Right.
Um, I think it's also in this era of political and social turmoil, I would say it's also rather important to take an inventory of those things in your life that add stress when you
Yeah,
don't need to subject yourself to them.
exactly.
And, really, really keep an eye on those stress levels for everything that you do. And yeah.
I love that. I love that. I think that today has been wonderful, Dr. Andre. I think people really need to reevaluate, their stress levels and look at themselves and really, think about, well, if I'm going through burnout, what's the cause and how can I fix this problem? And I think you've really given such great techniques and such great advice today because so many people struggle with anxiety, they struggle with burnout, they struggle
Yeah.
with dealing with daily life problems. And it's in life we consistently have obstacles, we consistently are encountered by anxiety, but we have to have a way of dealing with it. We have to learn a method of dealing with these problems because we'll always have stress in our lives one way or another. Things will pop
Yeah.
up, and when it comes to burnout, we have to really look at those red flags and realize that if spot it before it happens, and try to figure out a way of a coping mechanism that gets us out of it before we get ourselves into it. And I think you've really explained the concept of burnout today and ways that we could actually help ourselves so we don't have to fall into the trap of burnout and really experience all those negative effects that burnout has on a person's mind and body and even spiritual growth. And I really thank you so much for being on the show today. And, once again, tell everybody about your services and the things you provide before we go.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a social psychologist, so a lot of what I do comes from that background. I'm a certified life and business coach, and so I help people with burnout, obviously, with grief, with all aspects of stress. And I do that through both courses, complete courses, and also with one-to-one coaching. And so in my business coaching, I quite often combine the two, business and life coaching. It seems to me to be pretty straightforward link to say that your business is never going to be growing at its optimal pace if you have challenges in your personal life that
Right.
you may consider to be nothing to do with your business. Well, guess what? They probably are to do with your business in some way or other. They're impacting your performance in your business as well as in your personal life. And all too often, if I'm coaching somebody who has a small business, they will it will transpire that their personal goals are not lined up with their business goals.
Yeah.
And my suggestion then is that we have to look at how we can change the business so that their personal goals align better with what it is they're doing at work. Because,
Yes.
especially if we started life in our 20s running a business or early 30s, we're very, very adaptable at that age. And
Yes.
so we can kind of get on this exercise bike that's called entrepreneurship
Yeah.
and be hammering forward. And the reality is that, in 10, 15 years' time, we look back and we think this is not satisfying to me. And so aligning personal goals with our professional goals is a critical part of the process. And of course, it's intimately tied up to things like burnout. You know, those are the sorts of things that lead to people having burnt out because they don't feel they've got any options
Right.
because they're on this path, entrepreneurship path, but on the other hand, inwardly, they know it's not really what they want to be doing.
100%. Oh, I agree. Now, where can people find you?
My website, it is actually I'm hesitating because it's all just changing to a different platform. But you can reach me on the coaching, sorry, the Burnout Foundation .co, theburnoutfoundation.co. You can also reach me on plan, PLAN, the number four, and change.org, planforchange.org. And you'll find everything about my coaching and my burnout programs on that website.
And are you on any social media also?
Yes, you can find Plan for Change on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook.
Excellent. Oh, well, this has been wonderful. I hope you'll come back on the show because there's many other topics I'd love to really dive deep in with you. And this has been a pleasure, Dr. Andre. You are really a special individual, and I'm so glad you're out there helping people with, these issues because these issues are really, everybody goes through them, and we all can really destroy ourselves if we don't really take care of them and learn how to really properly handle, stress, anxiety, burnout, all these things could really be very detrimental to our health if we're not,
Yeah.
if we're not handling them properly. So I'm glad you came on the show today to share different tools and techniques and strategies. And I'm glad, everybody, now knows who you are and that they can reach, for you. And this has been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been delightful to talk to you. And yes, let's get together and really help banish burnout.
Yes, 100%. Thank you so much. You have a wonderful day, Dr. Andre.
And you.